As our first step in this example, we're going to just define some inputs and constraints. And for the inputs, we're going to just think about, those variables that allow us to define, the parameters of the geometry, things that'll let us easily flex that geometry so we can adapt it to a lot of different conditions. So we're going to need to define what the building form is and either select the model element if we're using a mass form as our basic building form, or if we're going to do it using dimensions, we're going to need a building length, a width, and a height. Okay. We're also going to need some, I'll call framing system parameters, thinking about the floor-to-floor height within that form, as well as if we're going to have any framing edge, what I'll call offset distance, or if they're going to be right up to the boundary of the box. We're going to think about the divisions themselves. So we can actually approach it a couple different ways, and we do in this example. We have the notion of fixed divisions, where we can specify just a number of u and v direction divisions. Okay, or we're also offering in this example the ability to compute the divisions by spacing. So if we specify a maximum spacing in the u and the v direction, letting Dynamo go through and figure out how many divisions would actually be possible given that maximum spacing, to kind of make sure the spacing gets no larger than that. Finally, we have some input variables for the beam systems, the number of beams in each bay, as well as whether to rotate them 90 degrees. So a lot of different input variables to give us a lot of flexibility in this example. On the constraint side, all I really have on this side are really the structural element properties. So if we start thinking about actually placing these elements in Revit using the lines that we're going to be generating in Dynamo, we'll need the level that the elements will be associated with, as well as the framing types to use. So the framing type for the columns, the framing type for the beams in each of the different directions, and the framing type for the beam systems. So let's just go through and take a look at how that's implemented. Over here on our input variables, you see we have select model element. I have the dimensions over here, and I actually have a true false, so a Boolean here about whether we want to be using the mass form or using the dimensions. So you get a choice there. For the divisions, we have the idea of the U versus the V divisions, okay, so in each different direction. And again, we have some Booleans here set up to say, do you want to use the fixed number of divisions, or would you like to use these spacing parameters and compute the number of divisions? And finally, down here, we have the number of beams in each of the different beam systems. Okay, so within each of the different bays, how many beams, and whether we want to rotate that 90 degrees. So those are all what I'll think of as the inputs to the geometry. These are some inputs just for the Revit framing. So I think of them as constants for our geometry, but they actually are used to then determine the sizes when we place things in Revit. So we have the structural column type, the framing type in beam direction 1 and beam direction 2, the framing type for the beam systems, and the levels to associate all that with. So a lot of different inputs that'll give us the flexibility to then go ahead and change the geometry really very freely.